Thanks for coming out today. We're using the microphones partially so that we can use this content on the internet and on YouTube. So if you see questions asked and answered, we'd like you to use the mics as much as possible, and I'll repeat questions and answers as they occur. So first of all, thanks for coming out on a cold night. I know that you had a choice of going to rights and wrongs in the NoSQL phenomenon. C. Mohan, over an IBM researcher, I'm sure is giving a very nice talk on that for Oracle NoSQL. But you're here, and I appreciate that. Thank you. So our discussion today is titled Retail Nirvana, Providing a Unique and Individualized Experience in Real Time. And we have here our two guests, Tushar and Seth, who have been working and practicing in retail personalization for a number of years. And the goal tonight is really to talk about their experiences of what really works in retail personalization. They have a broad range of experience. And I hope you can walk out of this discussion with some real ideas to take back about not just, hey, let's dump some data into Hadoop, but instead, let's start some real projects that can help my company be more successful, make more money, and make use of real data, big data. So if you're not getting that, please be interactive, ask some questions. So to my right is Tushar Montaño.
You even got it right with the tilde.
Excellent. So I'll let him talk about himself, but he has a long experience as a pioneer in customer relationship management and led big data and marketing analytics at companies like Walmart.com, eBay, Sybase, and PeopleSoft.
Thank you, Brian. My name's Tushar Montaño. It's really great to be here. Oh, can you hear me okay? Yeah, okay. It's really great to be here this evening. These are the kinds of gatherings that really drive the Valley and drive the joy of working in this area. Brian was gracious when he said, I've been doing this for a while. I've actually been doing it for more than 25 years. The term big data is new for some very good reasons, but finding value within data is not new at all. The first real job I ever had in my life, I was 18 years old, 1978, and I happened to know something about an Excel-like spreadsheet on a CPM-based machine. And I was hired by a politician in Santa Fe, New Mexico, to get all the demographics of a certain geographic area and see if I could find patterns within that data that would find likely voters, and even more importantly, likely voters for him. That was in 1978. Does that use case sound familiar? I think we had a presidential election not too long ago in which data were leveraged in order to actually probably swing the election in his favor. So the concept of finding value in data is not new. But what big data brings to us is the richness of a whole new world of data points that we can select from in real time, and that we can then leverage to very tightly focus an experience on a particular individual and do it every single time they come into my store or my website or whatever other channel they come into. So my history, starting from that experience of data mining, I started a company where we built an early CRM product, but it was before the acronym even existed. We called it Electronic Performance Support Systems. That's the difference between Tom Siebel and me. Had I come up with the acronym of CRM, I probably wouldn't be sitting here today. But the fact is, we created a customer support system that used data about customers as early as 1988, and it was a genuine CRM system. And that company was acquired, in fact, by Tom Siebel in 1992, which is what brought me to Silicon Valley. Since then, I've worked for companies like Sybase, where I built a methodology for how you build very large data warehouses, how you build analytics on top of that data warehouse. I built PeopleSoft's first true SaaS product, which was a CRM product, based on a subset of an on-premise product they had. And I've worked at Walmart.com, where I was one of the founders of their big data and analytics practice, and we'll be focusing a lot more on that as the evening progresses, because a lot of my real world experience on focusing on customized and unique experiences on multiple channels comes from Walmart.com and later my experiences at eBay. And I look forward to having a very interactive conversation around that. Seth?
Hello everyone, my name is Seth Kutty. I'm Vice President of Professional Services for VentureSoft, and I'm really happy to be here. Thank you, Brian and Aerospike team, for having me here. A little bit about my background before we get involved in the discussion. My first job was at Singapore Airlines doing predictive analytics for real-time pricing. This was more than 15 years ago. I moved here to the Bay Area about 11 years ago thinking that Bay Area, everybody's going to be using predictive analytics. And lo and behold, I found out it wasn't true. Analytics, business intelligence, and when I moved here, was still in its infancy. Many companies were still beginning to ask the questions, what are the KPIs do I need? What metrics do I need? What's the business problems that we were trying to solve? So it wasn't a technology solution, it was a business solution. And I got involved. I've been doing analytics now for about 10 years. I started with IBM Cognos, we moved into SAP, and then most recently, after many years, I was a program architect for VMware. I ran one of the largest financial systems for them. I left VMware about a year ago and I joined Tesla as their director of IT. And in there, I handled pretty much all the finance, HR, and core IT projects, including big data. Right? So if you guys have, just to give you some context, Tesla cars actually send out a lot of diagnostic data, just kind of a weblog, back to what we call the mothership, where a lot of this stuff gets analyzed for predictive failure. And we had the same problems that many of you are going to face now as we start scaling up in data. So I left Tesla a couple of months ago, and I joined VentureSoft to hit basically the big data practice. So I run all of professional services for VentureSoft, and really I'm the single neck to choke for customers, right? So I'm very happy to have Tushar kind of join the team as a principal to head up the big data practice for retail, and we're really happy to talk to you guys about and just sharing our experience working with customers across the country as well as in the Bay Area on all the pitfalls that we've come across, right? Let's not make the same mistake they made. And we're very happy to share that with you. So, thank you.
Great. So, thanks. Let's move on to, let's try to get some specifics about what you guys have actually seen in the field of web personalization. So Tushar, why don't you start and tell these guys some of what you told me about what people can expect in starting up a big data project. What can these techniques that you guys are using actually achieve in the field?
Okay, so that's actually one of the biggest hurdles that you're going to have to cross is how do I actually start? Where do you start in a big data practice, and why are you doing it? Well, there are two fundamental use cases of why you want to use big data. The first use case is to minimize abandonment, and the second use case is to maximize conversion. All use cases that you're going to look at and all the KPIs are ultimately going to funnel down to one of those two areas. So the suggestion and experience that I've had in starting up a big data practice in a company as big as Walmart.com or at eBay is that you want to start small and be iterative. You want to, the biggest hurdle that you're going to be facing as we move forward and out of the valley into established Fortune 1000 and Fortune 5000 companies is the legacy data systems that already exist. So you're going to have to build relationships with all of those stakeholders that own the legacy data as you build the new analytics and data on top of that. And those relationships are as important as the value and the products that you're going to be building internally for your organization. It's been my experience that my chief stakeholder at every place I've ever worked at is the chief marketing officer. And so you use that person to be your ally in relating to the legacy data owners because they've had a mission for the entire history of that enterprise to protect that data and to follow compliance issues. And you need to prove to them that we're not only going to support those compliance issues, but we're going to show you whole new ways of realizing value in that legacy data as we bring in new unstructured data to combine with that data.
So specifically, what kind of success did you see, let's say, at Walmart?
Okay.
What did you actually do? And what were you able to show them in terms of actual bottom line success?
When I came to Walmart.com, there was only a vague appreciation of any kind of customization for the user experience. And we set out and created a pilot project. We were going to do basic A/B testing and variance testing, where we would try and build profiles based on clickstream behaviors of customer segments. And these were broad customer segments. We started off using the Pareto rule of 80-20, and using broad customer segments, we were able to create about 25 different profiles, each for abandonment and for conversion. And when we would spot these patterns, we would funnel ads and data into the experience of that particular user that would minimize the abandoned behaviors that we saw and maximize the conversion behaviors. And what we experienced on the very first project that we did, a 6-month-long project, we saw an uplift of 21% in revenue over a 6-month period. And those are the kinds of numbers that will turn anybody into your ally. And it's been my experience in 2 other instances that between 18 and 22% is the uplift you can experience from doing very simple, straightforward behavioral profiling to minimize abandonment, maximize conversion based on clickstream profiling. It's very simple. I mean, those are good numbers. Those are happy numbers.
Great. When you talk about uplift, you're talking about
revenue.
Just straight up revenue off of the website.
Right. We weren't so concerned about saving money on infrastructure or anything related to supporting the website. It is a dogfight out there in the retail world. I mean, Amazon, Target, Macy's, any multi-channel retailer you can think of, they are attacking this with a vengeance, and they need to. It's going to be do this or die. And that's why it's such a hot topic right now. How do you get started? How do you start showing value? Because if you don't do it, you will not survive. It's an imperative of survival right now.
So in terms of the techniques, you were talking about a very basic forms of categorization. Can you talk a little bit more about sort of how easy that was in some sense, or what you had to go through in terms of A/B testing, finding those segments? Was this a matter of hiring a lot of PhDs, or how'd you go about it?
It was not, the data science part was not the most difficult part, because the mathematics involved, and I'm not a data scientist, I'm a business person that happens to know a little bit about data mining. Using very straightforward, in the pilot project in which we experienced 21% uplift, we only selected 25 data points based on what the marketing organization suggested to us as being important to them. We took these data points and then we did very rigorous, structured regression formula against those 25 data points until we began to find the patterns emerge. That doesn't require data science. Now, data scientists will be very, very important as we move to the 3 V's of big data. But to get started, you don't need that. In fact, you don't even need the expertise in-house so much, because there are emerging service organizations that will help you in your business to begin these pilots and to begin exploring these very issues.
Great. So that was part of your Walmart experience. Maybe you can share one of the other ones that you've had like this as well.
Okay. At eBay, I manage the eBay Motors portal, which is their largest revenue-producing portal. And what was great about eBay, to contrast my experience at Walmart.com, is that eBay understands this technology They have in-house expertise, and I didn't have to deal with legacy data issues. And what we really wanted to do, and what we got from big data at eBay, I took my learnings from Walmart.com, which is about segmentation and the 80-20 rule. And what I could do at eBay was really cool, and this is where you're going to go next after your initial pilots, is that what big data allows you to do is that you can create very fine segments. You can create very small segments and apply the 80-20 rule at each of those segments simultaneously. So instead of having a dozen fairly broad customer segmentations, you can easily have 100 customer segmentations. Applying the 80-20 rule, at eBay, we got a 22% uplift in raw revenue on that portal alone over a 9-month period. But what was cool there was the number of segmentations and still applying the simple 80-20 rule. But it's the number of segmentations that we could get because of the enabling technologies like real time.
So make this visual for me. So you looked at my clickstream data, you put me into a segment, and then what? Were there offers? Was there a page coming up? Is this search terms?
All of the above.
All of the above.
Okay, so we put together a methodology of once we identified a behavior in a segment, and these changed all the time. This was the fun part of working at a company that really understood web marketing, is we would put together a stream, a workflow, a methodology. So as soon as we identified a behavior based on a click stream, we could then put up ads, we could put up content, we could do some kind of cutesy personalization if we knew who you were based on a login, and then of course relevant offers. And that work stream would change all the time. That's the next version of A/B and variance testing. Isn't just static web pages, but what is the flow of the content that you're going to throw up on that page based on the behavior that you've recognized. And that's the next level of variance and A/B testing.
So it sounds like you had to first you had to believe that there was this much value in the clickstream data.
Yes.
Then you had to go about starting to gather all of that data from a large-scale enterprise. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about how you actually convinced them to start these kinds of projects and give you that data and give you those hooks into a large-scale system.
Oh, okay. So, again, starting small and iteratively.
Go ahead.
I've been dominating the microphone.
Thank you.
So please, Seth.
Yeah, so I think it's quite typical. I think when we walk into customers, and in this case, whether it's eBay or Walmart, the key thing is to iteratively come out with what we call a minimum viable product. A lot of the times you don't know the risk of getting into a technology or a solution or a framework. You're trying to figure out what is it that I don't know, right? There's a lot of things you may get involved, and you want to get that out as quick as possible. So getting to a proof of value or a minimum viable product establishes and mitigates the risk. Sometimes you don't know what your risk exposure is. So this gets you to a point where you're basically able to say, well, this is really what I'm looking at. I'm able to now take that and champion that cause internally to the CMO, whoever it may be, and say, look, it really works. We've tried it out. That's what we want. It's never a boil the ocean approach. It's let's do a proof of value, minimum viable product with a very specific methodology, a single spike or down the middle that allows us to know what are the attributes of what you're trying to get to. What are the metrics? What are the technologies?
So you still have to talk these guys into that first thing where you're going to get some servers and you're going to need to get data flowing into your system. So using a lot of those keywords like start small and iterative, I'm sure that helps in the process.
Right.
But then there's actually getting the sign off and starting to get the data flowing.
Right.
Tell me a little bit about that process with these larger companies.
So with many larger companies, what typically happens is there's already an initiative typically that people are looking at big data. CIOs are hearing that buzzword everywhere. They're like, well, we have data. What do I do? Right? So it always starts internally, right? They look at the internal team and they'll basically say, what do I do with this data? I need to figure something out. We're accumulating, we're running into problems. Let's figure out what to do. The next question is, well, let's look at companies like us outside who has done this, but they can't go talk to their competitors. What do? they talk to people who have done this before, consulting companies, professional partners, and they talk to us and they basically say, well, you guys have done this before. What are some of the lessons learned, right? What's the uplift, for example? You get a revenue uplift, was it an abandonment issue? We help them, we educate. The first part of it is always education about this is possible, right? With the data that you have, this is possible. But you need to be able to prove to yourself that it is possible, and that's where the minimum viable product comes in. Right?
So what are some of the sizes for a company of that size to get to minimal viable product? Is it hundreds of servers? Is it a couple months? Is it 6 months? I know it's going to be different for everyone, but if you're trying to set expectations for a random company, where would you start?
I would say 3 months to 6 months is very easy to do. It's a very viable product, right? So basically, because we take a very iterative approach to how we build a minimum viable product, 3 to 6 months is actually pretty amazing, right? Most web-based companies, that's way too long. That's an eternity for them. They need it tomorrow. Enterprises, when you talk about $1 billion and below, right? They they tend to be a little bit more conservative, but they're getting into it, and they understand that 3 to 6 months is natural. So bear in mind, the context is they're coming from a traditional data warehousing approach. Traditional data warehouses take 12, 18 months to build, right? So when they come from that context, 3 to 6 months is nothing for them. If you can go in there and basically say, this is really the solution, big data solutions, whether they're cloud-based, they're fairly easy to deploy, and we can actually make that work for you and show you the value of it very quickly, they'll start buying into it, right? They at least want to experiment and say, look, we're gonna have to sunset our technologies eventually. Let's go figure out what to do. Right?
So when you're talking them into this legacy data problem, what are some of the tricks and tips that you would give for how to get the data out of those legacy systems?
Alcohol helps a lot. No, seriously, it's just old-fashioned business. There's no secrets here. It's about building relationships, and you find out your number one ally is always going to be the marketing organization, and typically any company that's even exploring these initiatives is already a marketing dominated organization, and you leverage that relationship first, and you show that I wanted to leverage something that Seth said that's relevant to this point, and that is the cost of entry for a pilot project is not that high anymore. Because of the cloud, you can get infrastructure. Getting clickstream data is not expensive. Storing the clickstream data is not. These are not very expensive pilots to get started, and that's one of the ways that you can sell it. And then you also point out to the legacy data owners that you aren't touching the data. You are only reading the data. And every single time you speak to the legacy data owners, you start every conversation and every sentence is, by the way, we just want a subset of data that we can read.
And you were talking about, when we were talking earlier about CSV as one of the other keywords.
Yes.
You just say, I want to touch the data, give me an export from CSV. That's it.
Okay. That's only the beginning. That's how you get started. Because I never could fully realize at either Walmart.com or in any of the projects that Seth and I have done together, I have a vision of when we do a customized user experience, that it happens right now based on the data that I have immediately available. Even great organizations like eBay, there is a latency and a lag in the currency of the data. And that was still 24 hours. Now, that doesn't seem like very much if you're doing look-back analytics, but if you want to do a customized experience here and now, or predictive analytics, it has to be real-time. And that's, once you've proven the value of getting an extract, then, and that you're not hurting the data, you're not touching their OLTP at all, then nothing's being harmed, you can move closer and closer to that vision of what real-time can provide.
So what about the problem of, so getting the data, that's one legacy thing, and now their old website or their existing website is another legacy system in some sense, right? Yes. Maybe not as legacy as their big, their regular data, but now you have to start integrating with those guys, and it's not going to be read-only, right? You're going to be putting stuff inside their current experience. Right. How do you talk them through that and talk them off the ledge a little? Well, not that, talk them inside.
I think it's act of nature. Really. And in the simplest form, most CMOs would know that that has to happen. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. So when we walk in, when we talk to the CMOs, typically we address it from the approach of, tell us what is working. If you walk in and you use most of the retail websites, they have 140 properties, 200 properties. It is not one. Company like eBay would have so many different properties. But within there, enterprises have silos. There'll always be one group that does it a lot better than somebody else, and they're trying to transplant that logic across everybody else. But that it's not one person. It's a group. It's a team. So the team structure now needs to be replicated. There has to be a framework for doing it. And when we walk in, basically we're like, a lot of the times Group A doesn't talk to Group B. Internally within many enterprises, Group A doesn't talk to Group B. So we act as the ambassadors. We work with them and we tell them, look, here's what's worked in vertical A, here's what's going to do in vertical B, but we'll do it, we'll innovate it, we'll make it even better. And that gives us the opportunity to touch the properties, in a much better way, right? If something has worked, our job is always to add that plus, right? Add more value. So and that always makes sense for a lot of the CMOs.
If I could add to that a little bit, Brian, the competitive pressures that I alluded to earlier are driving the refresh of the websites, and unlike legacy data owners, the owners of the website are already pretty comfortable and used to changing data and content on the fly. And in fact, the new breed of website designers take it as a credo that they're going to be changing data on the fly all the time. It's a completely different culture. So that's a much lower hurdle to cross. In fact, they'll be pushing you to, hey, I want to put much more interesting and relevant data. How come you can't get to real time? They'll be pushing you.
So they'll mostly be on your side.
Yes.
A lot of the web guys.
Exactly.
Interesting. So I know you guys do a lot of work with these as sort of system integrators and advisors. There's also teams out there, in-house teams, right? So Walmart, for example, is famous for having bought Cosmos. Between in-house teams acting as an advisor, but then also SaaS vendors, people who are out there, like one company I keep hearing about, Rich Relevance, who says, just sort of give us all your data, we'll put some product recommendations and give you lift. Tell me a little bit about where those different approaches fit, because some approaches are going to be different for different companies.
You talk for Walmart?
Oh, sure. Let me speak a little bit more generally, because you said something that was very important, and that is that oftentimes they don't know when a business, even a marketing-oriented retailer, is moving towards bigger data and analytics. They don't know what their appetite for risk is. So using service bureaus and the cloud makes a lot of sense to prove a point. It's a low-cost entry point. It really minimizes the risk because you're not investing in people, infrastructure, even IP. All they want is your data. And then you're facing the same hurdle you'd be facing anyway, and that is, how do we get the data to make this an important project? And how do we get that to them? But that would be my recommendation, especially if they really don't, they know they need to do it, but they don't know what their appetite for risk is. So let's figure it out. Let's see what our appetite for risk is. If this is working and we see uplift and we begin to minimize abandonment, maybe there's something here. Maybe now we start making incremental investments into in-house IP and infrastructure.
If I can add to that, I think there are many companies, most companies will try out something first, right? Whether it's rich relevant, they'll try a service bureau approach because it's absolutely the low-cost entry point for core analytics. But very, very soon, they'll come to a point where this is not quite giving us the competitive edge we're looking for. We're a unique company. If my competitors are using the service bureau and I'm using the service bureau, what is the difference? How do we differentiate? Analytics is where it makes the difference, right? So a lot of the times we'll see companies migrating from a service bureau approach to an internal analysis. They want to build their core analytical team in-house. And that's when they said, who do I hire? What process do I need to put in place? What tools do I need in place? And at that point, I realized that it's all been in a black box. Now I need to unravel, pull the data in, and analyze it, and the whole big data initiative starts off, right? So it's really, it really depends company to company. But if you ask me, if we started a company tomorrow doing retail, that's the approach that I would take. Start small, make it successful, get to a point where you realize that it doesn't scale for me anymore, and then start bringing in my in-house teams and start building up the infrastructure.
So one of the things people talk about big data is big data hiring. Having first the service bureau approach, then trusted advisors. The companies you work with, how hard is it for them to hire? And where do you see them succeeding in their abilities to hire people who can do this?
It's extremely difficult to hire. Big data specialists are really in high demand. If you look at Ventana research, number one reason of big data issues out there is people. They just can't find enough people. Second one is training. The next one is scalability, right? So literally that's where we talked about people, process, and tools. The companies that are successful in hiring usually hire the top leads from e-commerce companies that have already hired people, right? They'll bring in somebody from eBay, they'll bring in somebody from Walmart.com, and because they need somebody who understands the space. A lot of the CMO, CIOs, this is new technology. If you look at the landscape of big data products out there, it's mind-boggling. It's just the acronyms. You need a PhD to just know everything in there. So a lot of them are just coming in with very basic understanding, help us build a team, right? And when these guys go out and they start looking, they're finding they can't find enough people because the same guys that they used to work with, their A team just got hired by everybody else. So
it's tried and true in the valley. Yeah. Poaching is one of the primary mechanisms still, unfortunately.
Right.
Building the expertise in-house is essential to long-term success.
Yeah. It is a current state situation, but I'm thinking in about a year to 2 years, it'll the problem will just self-solve. Hopefully, we don't have proliferation of other products, but that's really the key thing. I think I've seen this happen again and again in the valley, right? Which is, a brand new technology comes up, there'll be a shortage of skills because everybody now needs to kind of spread thin and kind of learn different tools. And then over a period of time, you've got, acquisitions and mergers happening, and there's a consolidation of tools that begins to happen. So at that point, you don't have a problem with people anymore. But right now, that's really the issue.
So maybe let's talk a little bit, shift gears a little bit to, you showed a vision of very simple segmentation, some batch analytics, and then using that for sort of real-time curve fitting approaches of, various different strategies and sorting those out. So let's talk a little bit about real-time as well, because it's a pretty simple method, and I actually used some of the similar techniques at Aggregate Knowledge about 5 or 6 years ago, where, really you can do a lot in batch, more than you might think. So what really needs to happen in real time, and what's your proof points for what has to happen? What makes sense within the first, in minutes, hours, sub-hours, etc. Lay out some of what's important there.
Okay, so the most relevant use case that comes to mind, especially this being the Christmas season, is monitoring the social media sites in real time. A smart company, and there are proof points of this time and again from companies like Amazon, especially eBay, monitoring Twitter, Facebook, other social media, and being able to immediately act on trends so that you can change the content and context of ads and pages within minutes of spotting a trend. The technology is it's genuinely awesome, the technology available right now to be able to monitor in real time vast amounts of data and to be able to spot trends. The first use case, and really an important use case, is social media. It's so important that political figures and high value entertainers, they actually hire service bureaus to monitor that in case there's a trend happening so that they can stop it, intercept it, or leverage it.
Okay, so let's paint the picture here. So monitoring social media, I'm a retailer. Am I going to watch for products that are being mentioned and then do deals based on that? And then why does that, can't I do that tomorrow? Or paint the picture of really what you would monitor and then what actions you would take.
Okay, so the vision that I have, and the reason I want to get to real time, is that I don't want to just monitor products. I want to monitor news trends and buzz trends. Some cool new toy comes out based on a Tolkien movie that has an unexpected buzz because it's an especially cool thing, and someone comes to my website that fits a segmentation that would possibly be a buyer for that. Throw the ads at them. Make sure that your real-time bidding systems are prepared to leverage these kinds of trends. It's an end-to-end ecosystem. So it isn't just making offers that are relevant to buzz in the social media. It's making sure that your real-time bidding systems, your content. So let's use that use case. So there's a cool toy based on a movie that's unexpectedly even more popular than anyone expected. Make sure that you can put up the ads, have cool content, and make sure are your inventory systems in real time. Can you move the product to the places it needs to be? This is what real time can actually bring. Everyone says ship to store, right? Well, we don't want ship to store. We want it to be in place proactively. And
if I can add to that, I think just to add to that use case, just to add a little bit more clarity to it, you can't track everything that is happening. You can't proactively know and run a marketing campaign and say, well, next week we've got a movie release coming up, it's got a toy in it, and therefore I'm going to plan for it. It doesn't happen that way. No. There are spikes in demand, right? When a spike in demand happens, how do you capture and monetize it as quickly as possible? That is key in retail, right? If I start seeing X number of people coming to my website and looking for a 50-inch TV or a toy, I'm already too late. I'm already too late because I didn't know how to price it accordingly. I didn't have the landing pages in place. I didn't have anything in place. It's too late. They're gonna come in, they're gonna look at the price, and they're gonna go to somewhere else. But if I already knew that, if I already had a little bit of a leading indicator to say, here's kind of the profile is picking up, and boom, do something about it in real time, you've got the customer. Right, that's really what we want to get to.
So one thing I'm reminded of is I was talking to some gentlemen in southern Maryland, northern Virginia, and they talked about real time, and they said you want to have a human in the loop. You want to have, you don't want just machines pulling triggers. you want someone to sit there and say, well, is this really a trend or not? What are these retailers doing? In that case, do they really want to start firing off deals automatically? Or do they have human oversight for these things?
So I can't. You can probably speak about Walmart, but I think from my experience, what we've seen with customers is that because the capability doesn't exist, that mindset doesn't exist. It just doesn't. They just think that everything's going to be batch. It'll be nice one day for us to have real time, but the fact of the matter is the stack exists. The technology stack exists now for us to be able to enable it, right? And it's getting that, proof of value or that case in front of them to say, it is possible, why don't you try it out and see for yourself how much you can make a difference. So you just need one champion in-house to be able to do it. But a lot of the times they don't do it because traditionally when they talk to the IT team or within the company, they're like, nah, this is not possible, I've never heard about it. That's really the reason, Brian, that I've seen.
It's part of the maturation process of any business. And it's also part of the maturation process of the technology, in my experience, Brian. Once upon a time, you would never have a machine pull a trigger, ever. The marketers would never allow that because they want to know personally about it. As trust has grown in the capability of the technology stack, there are automatic triggers that can be pulled with low risk and high return. We're going to see that trend more and more because there's just too much data to monitor. Machines are getting smart enough and the technology is getting smart enough. We're going to see some spectacular failures, by the way. This is my prediction is as we get to automatic triggering, we're going to see some really interesting unexpected behaviors. But that's going to be the trend, is more and more trigger pulling. But the humans will always be in charge of the most relevant, and especially around the brand. If it's around the brand, there'll be a person involved.
Yeah. One thing I can give as an anecdotal evidence was when I was at Singapore Airlines and we did real-time pricing. If you went in and somebody said, give me the price from Singapore to Bangalore, for example, right? And you'd see a pricing come up. We had built in stochastic modeling. We were able to know exactly what the pricing was going to be. But if we saw a spike, there was a threshold, and above the threshold, it goes to a human, and below the threshold, it'll be automatic. That's really the key, right? Being able to identify what is that threshold upon which a human being needs to make a decision.
So let's talk about pricing for a minute, because there's a lot of interesting points there, and simply offering lower prices. I think that's not actually the answer, right? Because you actually want to get the higher price, and the problem of keeping prices high for the people who are willing to pay it. So maybe you can talk a little bit about dynamic pricing versus avoiding a race to the bottom in pricing.
So I think pricing is really a function of the capability for you to fulfill that demand, right? So if you're Walmart.com, or you're a big retailer who has access to infinite inventory and you control that market, you don't need to change your pricing. You can just keep it as it is because all your competitors are going to dry out eventually. But if you're if you're selling a commodity product, then really absolutely pricing is going to be key. And the question is, who's your customer base? If it's an existing loyal customer base, you don't have to worry about pricing. So there are lots of parameters that goes into dynamic pricing for each customer experience. And you can play around with it. Big data gives us opportunity to play around with it and set those parameters, to make sure that every customer, there's absolutely minimal customer abandonment, long customer lifetime value, without compromising on pricing. Especially in retail. I mean, the margins.
So what are some of the techniques to sort of sort that out?
Okay, so in my experience, this is one of the most important questions that you just asked, Brian, because the web. Who in this room hasn't raced to the bottom, been in a store and checked prices on, 6 websites just like that? Okay, it is a race to the bottom unless you're getting the feeling from the vendor that you are recognized and unique and valued. Speaking anecdotally, I would rather spend 10% more at a business that says, "Hi, Tushar, by the way, the last time you were here, you did X, Y, and Z. Here's some stuff that's going to increase the value of that." That's worth 10% to me, and I'm not going to run away. It's all about customization, understanding who is doing the shopping right here, right now, and giving them maximum value for their time, because it's about time as well. That's a dimension that can't be forgotten. You're at a store, and you get your smartphone and you start checking prices. Well, if in fact it can be faster and have a more delightful experience, maybe I'll go to Target instead of Walmart and pay that 10% extra. It's about the end-to-end experience.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
So this is very interesting to me. You might be, your profile may be that you appreciate the service component that you allude to. I may not. As a retailer or a retailer in this case, how do I differentiate between your profile and my profile, which is what I think it boils down to, right? When we say dynamic pricing, you need to be given, the golf club that you're being sold, you would buy it at $199. I wouldn't buy it at $199. I'd race to the bottom and buy it only if it's $149. And how do we differentiate between you and me? I guess, are there techniques that Walmart.com uses for things like that?
Oh, absolutely. Most e-tailers use these techniques today to differentiate the first key, and it's not always rocket science. If a customer self-identifies by logging in, that's a huge differentiator right there. Now, there are also profiling techniques you can use that can identify a returning customer that has, one of the techniques that we used at Walmart.com is keeping track of what the purchase price was versus the average price of a product at the time of conversion. If it's higher, that person will probably fit the profile of the value customer. If it's lower, then that person probably isn't worth spending a lot of time and energy on because they're going to race to the bottom no matter what. There are very specific techniques for this.
So that would almost argue that you should have a few products that you have the lowest price on, so that you can then differentiate in your data set. If you have some lost leaders, then you can detect these people. If you and then if look for the ones buying the higher priced ones as well.
It's still omni-channel marketing.
Yeah.
A lost leader gives you the opportunity for cross and upsell that can make up the difference.
So is there geolocation happening? Geolocation on the IPs, like if you
Oh, absolutely.
in an area where your income is so much, then you can afford to pay $50 more.
So are people actually using that kind of geo data right now for pricing?
Yes.
Yeah.
How accurate is it?
That's a good question. I'm not sure that I can answer it accurately. No, seriously, there's a lot of fuzziness around geo in general because it's not that accurate to begin with. It's fairly broad, and we're just now beginning to experiment in a rigorous way empirically with geo pricing. It's being used, but I just don't know how accurate it is yet. I don't think the data are in yet to make an accurate decision on that.
And is that mobile geo
Well, let's see.
as well as browser geo?
It will be better with IPv6 when you can have static IPs. You will know where this thing came from.
Right. But I think the key thing is real-time pricing as a concept really needs to happen first, right? That's a mindset change for a lot of companies, right? If I were to go in and on my web, on my phone, I basically say, well, it's $100, and you have a friend who's coming in, he's living in a different zip code, and he says it's $98, and I'm like, what just happened? This company is not reliable.
That's what happened to Amazon, right? They got a lot of flack for it.
Exactly.
Right, it was based on just
real-time
browser.
pricing is
They just went Firefox versus IE, and IE guys got higher prices.
Exactly.
So I mean, what's your recommendation then for doing some of this real time pricing?
So that's a tough question. I think real-time pricing, just in my experience, it really is applicable only to areas where there is a time component to it. For example, if it is a perishable product, then you can play around with real-time pricing. If it is a commodity product that has a shelf life, then you really need to be careful about it.
So what's an example of, like, Walmart? I don't think of perishable.
Yeah, Walmart, it's not. So basically, travel products tend to be perishable. Goods that you're buying from Amazon that have a certain shelf life, and it kind of erodes over a period of time. Those things you can actually kind of play around with real-time pricing, because that's the absolute value, right? Because there's a time curve associated with the validity of the product. But if it is a solid product, if it's a hard product that you just take home, real-time pricing would really be, it has to be experimented. I have not, like I said, personally, I have not experimented with it.
Yeah, unfortunately, my answer is the same.
Yeah.
I'm an empiricist, and that's why I said we need to do a lot. This will be one of the most hot areas of experimentation and exploration right now. Is what does real-time what does it even really mean, and how do we maximize? In the end, CLV is still one of the key customer lifetime value is still one of the key KPIs. We don't yet know how real-time pricing is going to affect that in an accurate, clear way. This picture will clarify as we experiment more, but I'm an empiricist. We need to do a lot more experimenting. And it's going to be a fun area to experiment with, by the way, because combining CLV with real-time pricing, where do we end up? I have this gut feeling that we're going to end up that real-time pricing is not going to matter that much to CLV. You just want to still maximize that, and CLV is pretty much a fixed thing, and all the real-time pricing will be a wash in the end. That's my gut feeling.
Cool. So let's talk for a moment about recommendations and recommendation systems, because there's a lot of companies out there. There's a lot of service bureaus you can go to now. They'll siphon off your data. You fill a spot. What are you guys seeing in terms of? And that's all part of personalization, sure. But within that area, sort of what's succeeding, what's not succeeding so well. Are there service bureaus you think are doing good work? Particular techniques.
I think the key thing with a lot of the recommendation engines, which are operating as a service bureau at this point, Brian, It's a question of the feed, the quality of the feed that is going in. So what we found is good recommendation engines always recommend to you what is the tags that you need to put in place on your sites, on your devices and stuff, that be able to feed that in. Otherwise, they'll have to work with some kind of an aggregate structure to be able to tell you what is the product, what's the customer base. So the improvement process that we are seeing is really end state, right? A lot of customers need to be able to, augment their data, enrich their data in order for the feed to the recommendations, because recommendation engines are beginning to evolve. They're taking in more and more parameters so that they can give you more predictive analytics out of the box. So the approach that we find a recommendation engine that has that capability, right? Once you're in with a recommendation engine, it's kind of hard for you to wean it off because it's kind of wired into the existing mindset of how the company operates. Okay, so understanding the evolutionary path of a recommendation engine is going to be a very critical decision point for the company.
Yes to all that.
Oh, well, okay, so what I would
That's
add-
fine.
Yeah.
You can just say yes. So, any more questions out there? Yes.
I'm kind of curious about when you're talking about the concept of real-time pricing.
Yes.
Is there any mechanism of the IT system that only allows someone authorized to update? Let's say Walmart has the policy of price matching, right? But if some crooks out there you just go to a retailer, no-name retailer, try to fix that up, the iPhone 499, he can find another app, let's say 299, and he forced Walmart have to match the price.
So a question I think in general about the controls on real-time pricing and how enterprises work to make sure they're not gamed.
Yeah, that's a really terrific question, by the way, because we haven't been talking much. We've been talking about Nirvana here, right, as a title. When it gets down to it, policies and when I was talking about the legacy systems and compliance that they have, this is a fundamental part of the ecosystem of any type of real-time activity, whether it's content or pricing. There are very rigorous policies must be in place in order to make sure that the system cannot be gamed. Because if there's one thing we know about technology stacks, is that they will be targeted and gamed.
Speaking of gaming, when you're trying to sell consulting services in your sales cycle, do you feel that sometimes you're being gamed for as much free consulting as possible before they actually sign on the bottom line?
I'd be happy to talk to you about that offline. Seriously, of course. I mean, but what's the value add? What is consulting? It's about adding value, and what is free. There's no way that you can provide and prove value to a potential customer without giving them some value up front. And what we get in return, we always get information, because here's a new customer. They're going to either augment information that we need about the segment and vertical that they're in, or they will add negative data to our information set about that vertical. It's a two-way street. If they're going to try and game us for information, we're happy to go to a certain length at that, because we're getting information in return to be better next time around.
So I think one of the requisite questions right now is also about privacy and data sharing in these environments. So we've talked a little bit about, within a fairly large company where you do have a lot of data available. What are some of the, is it, I think Nirvana-wise, that, groups inside Walmart will be sharing data pretty easily, and then they're going to have problems going to outside bureaus. Can you talk a little bit about the privacy issues in this?
So I would say privacy is not so much a enterprise level initiative. It's always a project level initiative. There's always issues related to what data. I mean, if you're talking about a healthcare company, for example, privacy is a huge issue. If we're talking about an e-commerce company, it's not that big an issue. So it really depends on the domain that you're in and what privacy means. a lot of the stuff that we typically look at within big data is what we call sanitized data, right? We don't need to know a person's social security number. We don't need to know a lot of the information that related to privacy. Do we want to know what their IP address and their name is? Maybe, right? But a lot of the times when we start building aggregate data structures within big data, it doesn't really, it requires categories, right? We create subsets of categories. It's never tied up to an individual. The point where it comes to an individual is the intersection of they logging in and we providing and we matching it to their category, and we being able to cross-sell something to them. At that point, it is not a big data analytics issue. It is just operationals, right? So the way big data typically works is you don't really have to worry about privacy in that much. Getting data out, obviously, it's a political issue. Every company has, some security domain expert who basically say, well, what do you need? I'm not going to give you everything. I'm like, you need to give me everything. You just need to give me 10 fields, X amount of data. That's all I really need. These are the parameters for my decision-making process. So when we help define and scope that out, right? We don't have to go in and ask for the 200 fields that you guys have in your database or the 10 years worth of data. A lot of the data is already stale. I just need 16 weeks of data for me to do my analysis. So we can counteract a lot of the privacy issues by just defining the scope of what we're trying to do and why is it relevant, right? So it's just an armchair conversation most of the time. Unless there are very strict policies with HIPAA, with healthcare, those are questions that will take a little bit longer. But even then, the value proposition for the CMO or the CIO of the company is very clear. I need to provide this information so that I can make sense of it, right? So we'll go through an escalation process. We'll talk to the steering committee, whoever it may be, and get the right data. I've never seen it to be a big issue because the best thing we could ask for is give us standardized data. Clean up the stuff that you don't want to give it to us. That's fine with me. It doesn't really affect the model that I'm going to build for analytics.
So any more questions? He doesn't have questions. He's, anything else? Any closing thoughts you'd like to share with the audience in terms of real-time personalization or retail that you haven't covered?
No, I think those were all very interesting questions. I think the closing statement I would say is we're entering into a new era for retail. We talked about retail Nirvana in the sense that Tushar and myself, we have a personal goal. We think real-time analytics in retail is the way to go. It gives me a personalized experience because that's really what I'm looking for. If I went to Kayak, if I went to Walmart.com, if I went to a search engine, I should be able to know that this is the right price that I'm going to get and this is personalized for me. And we're just seeing the initial part of it. So I think in the next couple of years, with Aerospike technology and everything else, it's going to be an amazing ride for all of us, and I'm really excited to be part of it.
As always, at the start of a new business cycle here in Silicon Valley, we're seeing the confluence of technologies like real time, like an understanding of analytics, personalization. We are at the beginning of a brand new business cycle, and there's nothing more exciting than being part of the driving force at the beginning of that business cycle. It's one of the reasons I'm so interested in Aerospike and speaking here tonight with all of you, because everyone in this room knows that we're at the beginning of that cycle and we want to participate and drive it.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, and please thank our guests, Tushar and Seth.